Page 79 and following, Tillich engages what he calls the Christological problem. A lot of good material in there. Some of it's pretty dense. But I want to break down some things, keep it relatively, we'll say, simple. Tillich talks about two different, we'll call them schools of Christianity. And I often, I haven't thought about these two in a while. It's two schools, two traditions, two trends that developed in the certainly, probably we could say late second and into the third and fourth centuries. One of them has been associated with Antioch of Syria, same Antioch where Ignatius was the bishop who was arrested and taken to Rome for martyrdom. And it's the same Antioch of the New Testament where we read it's the town where the city where followers of Jesus were first called Christians. So up north of Jesus land, north of Galilee and Judea and so on, and also I guess where Paul was on his way to no, that was Damascus, different town. Anyway, Antioch has become associated with a particular sort of Christological tendency, and Alexandria, far to the east in Egypt, up there on the Mediterranean Sea, Alexandria, the center of Hellenistic culture meeting Judaism in Philo. You might remember Philo of Alexandria. And then in Christianity with, such luminaries as Clement of Alexandria and his successor Origen. And Alexandria has a very different sort of school or tradition in Christology. So Antioch and Alexandria, well, what are they? The school of Antioch, as Tillich even kind of outlines it for you, has been associated with an emphasis, we'll say, first of all, on Jesus' particularity as a human being, indeed as a Jew. It's a more, I would say, Hebraic or Jewish approach to Christology. Emphasis, again, on Jesus as a human, as our teacher, a teacher that we are called to follow. I think the Gospel of Matthew, which we tend to believe was written somewhere like upwards toward Antioch in probably around the year 70 to 75 of the first century. And it's by far our most Jewish gospel, and Jesus is our teacher. I think about the book of Hebrews where it says that Jesus, and I quote, learned obedience. He learned what it means to obey. He himself learned through the things that he suffered. And then Hebrews goes on to say, and having been perfected through the things which he endured, he has become the author of salvation for those who obey him. Okay, so he learned obedience through the things that he went through, and now is the source of salvation for those who follow him. So in the Antioch stream, you have an emphasis on, we'll say again, Jesus as a human, and not just any kind of human, a Jewish one, rooted in Jewish tradition, where we could say that, with the Torah, there's an idea about divine commandments and divine laws and human responsibility to, follow those laws or not. My dog's growling at something outside. Oh, that dog. So that would be the school of Antioch. When we use the phrase Christology from below during our week together, a Christology from below fits well with this Antioch tradition. Roughly at the same time, a different school of Christianity and of Christology was developing. We might say that if we were to associate this with a particular gospel, it would be the Gospel of John, right? Where you have the I am statements, and I and the Father are one, and I pray, Father, that they may, as I am in you and you are in me, and that we are one, that they may be one, and that they may dwell in us. This kind of language of inner dwelling, and of sort of like we'll say the union of the divine and human natures. Whereas in the Antiochian school, you get a little bit more of, again, the idea of God as the one of commanding voice of God, that Jesus becomes the great emissary of the commanding voice. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you, that kind of thing, right? So in Alexandria, and I don't mean these to be absolutely mutually exclusive, but the Alexandrian school would be less Hebraic and probably more Greek. And by Greek here, we would mean a deeper interest in like the divine nature as the source of immortality, and that the human nature through the union of human and divine in the person of Jesus, the human nature has the capacity to be drawn into union with God. So a little more mystical, more of the idea of participation in God, not to the exclusion of obeying God, but obeying God is a bit more, you're leaning back toward the West and Antioch, right? So a Christology from above. The Word became flesh, and because the Word has become flesh in this particular human, somehow this particular human then becomes the means whereby we also can be drawn into union with the divine nature. I want to say again, these don't need to be thought of as mutually exclusive, although they do exist in some significant, it's a dialectical relationship, right? A yes and no, a back and forth. That's sort of what's behind the Antiochian. So for Antiochian Christology, the issue is sort of like you begin with God the Father and Jesus, and we can call him Jesus the Son, but then the question becomes, well, what is the relationship between these two figures, and how do we honor the distinction between the two, and yet also affirm that Christ participates in the divine nature? And so again, the book of Hebrews is a real interesting exercise in this. In the anthology, right before the readings from Arius, I have selected passages from Hebrews. You can look at them. Hebrews 1, very strong Christology, kind of a wisdom Christology. I would say a heightened Christology. And then later in the same letter, you have in the days of his flesh, Jesus cried out with loud cries and tears to the one who is able to save him from death, and that Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered, as we've said earlier. So the school of Antioch always was wrestling with the question of how do we keep these two figures from kind of going so far apart that we're not affirming the divine nature of Jesus in a meaningful way. The school of Alexandria has a different problem. That is how to keep track of the human nature of Jesus. Because it had such a strong emphasis on like Christ as this, almost like the divine nature at its worst, it would be the divine nature totally enveloping the human nature. You get this in one of the people that Tillich mentions, whose name will come to me in a moment. But basically where the human nature is swallowed up in the divine. And so that while in principle you have a union of human and divine natures in Jesus, because the divine nature is so much, greater, we'll say, it's like a drop of water going into the ocean. Well, what are you going to get? You're going to get a fully divine human who is really only human in kind of principle. Again, if you were to look for, well, what gospel seems to veer nearest to this, it would be the Gospel of John. Allow me to illustrate it this way. It's one of those passages or comparisons that maybe, if you ever do this, to quote my friend and our colleague Sharman Atchison, here's one where I'd be raising some hell with some folks. The Garden of Gethsemane in, the Synoptic Gospels, in all of them, Jesus, is in great agony, right? It's like, I think it's Matthew that says that Jesus fell on his face in despair, crying out, and he's sweating. He's not sweating blood, by the way. That's not what Luke says, but the sweat's pouring off him so much it's like he's bleeding. It's just blood, sweat. He's sweating on his face. If it's possible, let this cup pass from me, right? That kind of language. Nevertheless, and that's what makes this point of obedience so significant. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done, right? The Antiochian school, they can dig this. And even that Jesus learned something through this, again, as the book of Hebrews would say. And we think probably describing Jesus in Gethsemane, the book of Hebrews says, again, with loud crying and tears, he cried out to the one who was able to deliver him from death, and was heard. And he was heard. Why? Because of his humble submission. Okay, that's again all in Hebrews. Now we go over here to Alexandria, or to the Gospel of John. Of course, the Gospel of John does not have a Gethsemane scene per se. This probably won't shock us. But there is a point at which, as he's nearing his time of arrest, Jesus says, now the hour has come. And this is a loose quotation, but it's pretty close. Now the hour has come, and what shall I say? What should I pray? Should I pray, Father, deliver me from this hour? Oh my goodness. It sounds a little bit like the synoptics in Gethsemane. Shall I pray, Father, deliver me from this hour? And it's a rhetorical question here, because he goes on to say, it's for this hour, it's for this very purpose I have come into the world. Kind of like foregone conclusion, no struggle. Hey, I'm just pressing on to what the reason I came into the world. That's a Christology from above. Now, my sentiments lie with the Antiochian school. I want to honor and I appreciate the Alexandrian school, and I see where they're coming from. We'll put it that way. But I guess I'm more of a Jewish type of a Christian when it comes right down to it, and this is why I wrote a book called Matthew Matters. I did. I wrote a little one on some of the passages in John a while back, and I really like that book. But my real sentiments are with this real recognition on Jesus' human limitations and struggles, because, as much of the New Testament would insist, and especially Hebrews, without that, we don't have one who really can connect with us and not just understand, but experience and know what it's like to be us in all of our struggles. That's hopefully a somewhat adequate introduction to the schools of Antioch and Alexandria.